welcome to the course Social Behavior and the Brain, an introduction to social neuroscience. I am Dr. Ark Verma, an associate professor at the Department of Cognitive Science at IIT Kanpur. This is the last lecture of the 4th week, and we are going to talk about a slightly interesting topic. We've so far in the last 4 lectures, we talked about activations of prejudice, stereotypes, which happens automatically, and we've talked a little bit about regulation and trying to suppress those things. In today's lecture, I am going to talk about an extreme form of prejudice. When all of this fails, an extreme form of prejudice referred to as dehumanized perception. Now, as we have seen so far, in the last 18-19 lectures, that racial biases, stereotypes, prejudice swiftly follow the recognition of social stimuli, such as the face. And efforts for the regulation of these biases and control of prejudice therefore need to be engaged for us to avoid the influence of these biases on our overt behavior. So, there are different motivations we studied. When you are internally you want to control bias, you want to keep out of these prejudice and so on, and then there are also external pressures, social cues that make you do that, all right. Sometimes it may happen that these things may not work, and if these things do not work and you are extremely prejudiced, and there is this extreme implicit tendency to have a prejudice for certain groups of people, then it can land us to a very different territory. It can land us to a territory of extreme prejudice. Extreme prejudice has consequences. It changes the way we cognize about the other individual, we understand, recognize, react to people from these other groups, other racial groups, other religions, other gender, other caste, anything like that. Now, one of the fundamental questions that has been asked across a bunch of disciplines, including psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, several other disciplines, theology for that matter, has been about the nature of the human mind. What is the human mind? How does it manifest? What is it made up of? How does this interact with this world, and so on. So, there are a lot of these questions that we keep asking ourselves. Even more fundamental question, however, can be, what does it mean to be human? Who are human beings? What are they made up of? What does it mean to be human as opposed to be another animal, or as opposed to be a piece of furniture? If you were to ask this, if I were to ask this in a large class, the response could be, that, oh, humans have a mind, they have an inner life, they have feelings and emotions, and they understand, and they have a free will. There are any number of things you will say. There are any number of things that will basically imply that we are thinking and feeling beings, all right. And previous older thinkers have also said, for example, Descartes, Descartes' dictum of cogito ergo sum basically answers this question partly. It says that, because I think, therefore I am certain of the fact that I exist, all right. How do you apply this to somebody else? How do you make sure that somebody, some of these other people also exist? You will need to apply the same logic, that they also think, they also have feelings, emotions, inner life, they also have a free will, and so on. And this is something very interesting. This is something that is the essence of social cognition. This is something that is the essence of how do we interact and behave with others, how do we interact with others, how do we understand them, all right, how do we empathize with them, how do we mentalize their internal lives also. So, that is all good, but is it possible that sometimes we do not do that? Is it possible that sometimes we treat people of certain outgroups, maybe different race, maybe different religion, gender, age, anything, any of these in-group, out-group thing you can say, is that possible that we do not consider them having their internal lives, having their feelings and thoughts and emotions and wills and that entire paraphernalia? If we are not able to do that, then what we are doing is we are dehumanizing them. See, the logic is very simple. The essence of being human is to have this inner life. The essence of being human is to have this inner feeling, thoughts, emotions, will, choice, and so on and so forth. In a case where you are not able to ascribe any of these things to this group of individuals, then basically what you are doing is you are not treating them as human. You are thinking that they are not humans. You are in a sense dehumanizing them. Now, there are various ways to look at it. For example, Appaya proposes a very interesting thought experiment. What is it? He says that imagine that there was a machine that looked and felt and sounded like and did all the things that your mother did for you, alright. How would you be able to tell that this machine is not really your mother? It is performing all the same functions, taking care of you, providing you with affection and comfort and all of the things that mothers do. How do you know that this machine is not your mother? And the answer that I am sure a lot of you will quickly shoot back is that no, the machine does not have the inner feelings, machine does not feel, it does not have the subjective experiences that our mothers keep having moment by moment, day by day and so on. So, the idea here is that we consider this aspect of inner life as a very important, as a very basic aspect, as a very basic determinant for somebody being human and not being a machine or not being another animal. So, this implies that even when you are considering other people, when you are thinking about them, when you are talking with them, when you are interacting with them, we basically perceive or attribute mental states to them. We attribute feelings to them, we attribute decisions to them and so on, and that is referred to as perceived humanity, alright. So, Harris and Fiske talk about this as perceived humanity. What if something else happens? What if there is this opposite, when you cannot perceive that, oh, this person might also be having thoughts, this person might also be having a will, or this person, say for example, if you are treating somebody unfairly, if they are treating somebody badly, if you are exercising violence on people, a lot of times people overlook the capability of understanding what the other person is feeling. If you are beating up somebody brutally, if you are hurting them verbally, if you are designing policies or decisions that are going to harm a particular group of people, what is it that you are doing? You are dehumanizing them, you are basically not considering that they also have an inner life, they also have feelings, they also have all of these composites that basically go in for somebody being an actual human being. So, dehumanized perception is a rather interesting concept, and it may a lot of times have its origins in extreme prejudice. When individuals consider the target as less than a human being, implying that they could not be attributed any feelings, emotions, and hence they do not deserve empathy, kindness and so on. In the previous lecture, I was mentioning to you, movies like Django Unchained from Quentin Tarantino, other movies like 12 Years a Slave, or say for example, if you see any number of movies about the Holocaust, alright, what you actually see is a complete disregard of the inner feelings, emotions, thoughts, will, choice of the outgroup, alright. So, for example, the Jews were treated as if they had no feelings, as if they had no emotions, as if they could not feel the amount of atrocities that were being committed on them. Similarly, in the years of slavery, you see that the African Americans were being treated as slaves, they are being made to work hard, they are being made to work in the field in all kinds of weather, beaten up, sold like commodities and so on. So, these are the situations where you feel that this people in power, people who had the privilege, are actually treating this other group as dehumanized people, as having no inner life, as being less than human beings, as being insects for example. Social neuroscience combines literature from two phenomena central to dehumanized perception. If you consider dehumanized perception, and we are going to study it in some detail in this lecture, two phenomena come to mind. First is mentalizing, the ability to actually infer other people's feelings and mental states and so on, and then this aspect of dehumanizing. We will talk about them in more detail as we go ahead. And social neuroscience seeks to explore this phenomena using theoretical frameworks from cognitive as well as developmental neuroscience. So, let us quickly jump into that. Now, Harris and Fiske proposed that dehumanized perception could be a psychological response to social targets who elicit the negative basic emotion of disgust, alright. So, if the people from the outgroup make you so uncomfortable, they incite the feeling of disgust, not just negative evaluation, not just the fact that you do not like them, not just the fact that you are you do not agree with them, but rather the feeling of disgust, where you actually do not want to entertain the possibility of having any relations with them. You know, very interesting scene from the movie Inglourious Basterds comes to my mind, where Christoph Waltz is interviewing this milkman in their farm, and he's talking about you know, Jews as mice who spread plague and diseases and so on. And you can see that in that conversation, the overriding feeling from at least Christoph Waltz, who plays this you know, plays the character of Hans Landa, and a German you know, general, a Nazi general, the overriding feeling in that conversation is of disgust. And yes, people want to override disgust, they want to avoid disgust, they don't want to you know, even consider or engage with things that give disgust. And that is when people start treating the outgroup as inhuman, as dehumanized, all right. So it has been argued that the medial prefrontal cortex, an area that is implicated in mentalizing, you know, understanding the feeling of others, may not be actually as active for targets of dehumanized perception as it is for other social targets. So in scenarios like these, you know, when you are treating this other individual with a lot of contempt, with a lot of disgust, with you know, if you are not treating them as human beings, interestingly, for such kind of targets, the medial prefrontal cortex is also not recruited. So there seems to be a fundamental difference here. There seems to be a fundamental difference in the way the mind, but not only the mind, the brain treats these kinds of people. Also interestingly, you know, in a bunch of these studies that have tried to study dehumanized perception, people have been shown that they fail to think or consider the minds of these dehumanized targets to the same extent as the social targets. So they don't treat them as having the same kinds of feeling, they don't treat them with the same degree of empathy and so on. On the top, you know, in addition, the participants describe these you know, targets of dehumanized perception as ill-mentioned, as inept, as unfamiliar, as dissimilar, strange, not uniquely human or typically human, prone to violence and so on. So what is happening is that there is so much negative attributes that are linked with this other you know, group, that you start on the basis of, you know, on a combined valence of all of these negative things, you start you know, getting this feeling of disgust. And when you start getting this feeling of disgust, what you fail to do is to consider that this is also a group of people that has the same kinds of feelings, that has the same kinds of emotions and thoughts and will and choices and aspirations that you would have. And that is a very characteristic gruesome sort of feature of dehumanized perception. Now let's start studying this in some detail. So the first thing that we want to study to a certain degree is this ability of mentalizing. What is mentalizing? Mentalizing is has been used interchangeably with theory of mind, and it basically refers to a process that involves inferring the mental states of other people's, internal states of other people's minds. And this can be both a deliberate process or it can be a automatic process. For example, if you are imagining a social target's mind, you know, people put you in that position that, oh, imagine how this group of people might be feeling. So if you are imagining, or how this person might be feeling the way you have behaved with him or her for that matter. So imagine a social target's mind imagining a social target's mind is influenced by information that is inferred from the person, the environment, or let us say a third source. Maybe there is a narrative, maybe there is a propaganda, maybe there is a lot of history that you have been taught, or prior experience for that matter, you know. And all of these sources converge, and they basically can have different kinds of components, such as people's understanding of other people's individual dispositions and their beliefs. On the basis of these informations, the way you judge this other person's disposition or the way you judge their beliefs can also sort of change. It includes, for example, this concept of mentalizing includes, for example, goals that you infer from people's bodily actions. So for example, if there is a glass of water on a given table and I am moving towards it and I am sort of thirsty, you can infer from my action that I am going to drink water. Or for example, attention, what is it that I am looking at? If I am looking at, say for example, you know, in a supermarket, in those aisles which are filled with lots of products, if I am eyeing something again and again, I am going back to that, maybe you can basically judge from my gaze the attention you know, that I am paying to certain components. Or also emotion, that is again, as we have seen you know, in much detail in previous lectures, that can be inferred from people's facial expressions. So mentalizing includes all of these three components. How do you judge somebody's goals? How do you look at what they are paying attention to, or how do you infer the emotion that they are experiencing at a given point in time? Also, people generally believe that goals like intentions can actually predict behavior. So, obviously, if I know what is the goal of a certain person in this room, I can be able to judge what they are going to act like, what they are going to do next. Also, intention can be, this is a very interesting part. If you look at this, a lot of times people can attribute intention to inanimate objects as well, suggesting that this process is not just limited to people. A lot of times you will see people saying, oh, my car is acting a bit weird today. Cars are machines, they do not have internal states, they are not acting weird or anything, it is just not working, the mechanics of is faulty, it is something that has mechanically gone wrong. But you will see people say that all the time, they say, oh, my bike is not starting, it has a mood of its own, it starts when it wants to and does not when it does not want to. So, we do this a lot of times. So, interestingly, we have this capability or tendency to attribute intentions to even inanimate objects, all right. Also, other kinds of theory of mind research further separates perceived intent, biological motion, episodic memory retrieval, and decouples mental states from reality. So, there is a lot that gets covered under what all comprises of theory of the mind, and we will keep talking about that to and fro, but just pay attention to how is it that we can ascribe internal states to inanimate objects, but not to the targets of disgust. Okay. People interestingly are able to infer others' personalities, a process that basically involves understanding a social target's mind as containing both goals and intentions. So, a lot of times we are engaged in this in judging. A lot of times, say for example, in gossips or in behind the back discussions, people are discussing other people, oh, that person wants to achieve that and hence is intending to do that. We do that all the time. And this ability to be able to calculate other people's dispositional attributions actually led Haider, for example, to refer to people as naive scientists. We are constantly creating hypotheses about these other people, and we are constantly checking our hypotheses against how these people actually act in the near future. So, inferring other person's insight is a lot of times viewed as an attempt to gain an insight into global warmth or intentionality and competence. So, you typically start from an individual and you sort of globally judge what they are about, what they are going to do, and whether you have to be warm towards them and so on. Again, a bunch of things included here. Now, it seems that the way this process operates is that the first personality inference suggests that the target's general good or we will be able to tell you about the target's general good intent or ill intent. The second basically suggests the target's degree of agency, how involved, how willingly the person is doing this good thing or a bad thing, and this is something that you can very easily infer. If somebody is actually good but is engaged in doing some not so very good things, you will be able to infer that, oh, the person is not willingly doing this, he is doing this because of some somebody is making them do that, or there is some other reason that there is compelling them to do that. Inferred warmth and competence, on the other hand, can also be used to predict the behavior that guides social interaction. If you feel warmly towards somebody else, you feel automatically connected to somebody else, you will also that will govern the way you will socially interact with these individuals. If you infer other people, say for example as cold, or you get a cold vibe with them, you get an unfriendly vibe with them, obviously your social interaction will get colored by that kind of impression. It's interesting that, as I was saying, people sometimes try and judge the behavioral tendencies of non-human targets as well, sometimes animals and pets and even objects for that matter. People make dispositional attributions to objects all the time, suggesting that this is not really limited to people, this is not really this idea of anthropomorphism or personification of animals and objects. It is something that this is a automatic process, and it is not linked, it is not exclusively reserved just for people, but it is something that we can exercise at will for that matter. Now, inferring other people's mental states allows us to predict their actions, and it is a very important aspect of the same. How do we interact with them, how do we judge their goals and intentions. Conversely, if we experience a failure to infer a person's disposition, it would involve a very basic failure of a very basic cognitive process about somebody. See, social cognition is all about understanding how people interact with others. So, if you cannot judge their actions, if you cannot judge what they are going to be doing, if you cannot judge how they are feeling, you are basically failing to perform a very basic cognitive process. Again, something that kicks in at a very early stage, 100 milliseconds or so, if we remember, we have seen in previous studies. If we do not do that, that is what is referred to as dehumanized perception. So, it is a fundamental difference in the way we treat individuals, and it is surprising because how will you fail at something that you are very typically good at doing? People are very good at inferring other people's dispositions from even very thin slices of their behavior. You observe somebody on the television, the way they are interacting with their colleagues, the way they are interacting to their subordinates, and even if you have seen just a snippet of their behavior during an interview or during a program that is running on stage, you will people are very good at saying, oh, this person is a very arrogant guy or is a very humble guy, from just a snippet of their behavior. So, people are actually good at doing this. Why are they failing to do this with respect to these dehumanized targets is the interesting question. Also, these spontaneous first impressions are not something that come and go. They seem to have a very strong trace of memory. They seem to be very long lasting. So, you might have heard that saying, first impressions is the last impression. The first impression that you have of somebody stays with you for the longest time, and in that sense it will color and it will influence your judgment. It will moderate the amount of information that you will retain about an individual. All right. And this basically is being referred to as part of the attribution theory. It was part of Solomon Asch's first impression formation experiments, and has basically talked about this ability of how people make these spontaneous dispositional attributions about others and the dimensions that sort of moderate how we are doing these attributions. A very similar activity, again part of mentalizing, is perspective taking. What is perspective taking? It can be referred to as a more conscious form of mentalizing, which describes the process of intentionally inferring other people's mental states. Basically, if I ask you to take the perspective of a slave several 100 years ago, who was working in the Americas and in the West and was being tortured and made to work and so on and so forth. I can ask you to take the perspective of a Jew. You can watch any number of Holocaust movies. You can take the perspective of a Jew who is suffering those atrocities, who is suffering those heavy discriminations and being made to treated like almost animals. So, this perspective taking is a very conscious, it is a deliberative process that moderates conscious and unconscious prejudice. A lot of times we talked about in the previous lecture that people who have an internal locus of control, a high sensitivity of conflict monitoring, are able to suppress their prejudice much better. So, if you are engaging in perspective taking, which is a very deliberate activity, it can actually moderate your conscious and unconscious prejudice towards these other people whose perspective you are being asked to take. Now, inferring others' mental states deactivates these stereotypes also through the greater overlap between the self and the other. Now, remember in the first week when we were talking about empathy, when we were talking about judging facial emotions, what were we talking about? We are talking about the fact that when people have to assess other people's pain, they use the empathic circuit, they use the same model, mental model, that, oh, if I would have been hurt in the same way, how much pain would I feel? And in that sense, when you take that perspective, it will automatically put you on the same pedestal as this other individual and automatically deactivate the subsequent stereotypes that exist. And in that sense, it is a rather interesting as a rather potent activity. So, these effects and perspective taking does not only work with real groups, it works with real groups and minimalist groups as well. Minimalist groupings are basically a paradigm that comes from Tajfel and Turner, who say that even if I randomly divide the people in this room into group A and group B, they will still have these group biases. Now, perspective taking has also been implicated in moral reasoning, in altruism and in aggression. So, when people are reasoning that okay, somebody has done this deed and whether this was the morally right thing to do or not, a lot of times people actually involve themselves in taking perspective. If I were in that place of that individual, I would not have stolen food from the restaurant, even if I was going to die of hunger. So, people can do this and then they can rationalize, oh, because the person was dying of hunger, and in this harsh and unfair world, basically stealing just a piece of bread should not be considered as immoral. So, maybe I will rationalize and will say, oh, the person's act was correct. So, in moral reasoning, perspective taking has been treated as rather important. In altruism, why are we kind towards others? Why do we try and donate? Why do you try to help others? Because we can, to a certain extent, at least take the perspective of, oh, these people must be suffering. These people, say for example, that when COVID happened, a lot of people engaged in donations, in helping each other out, because they were understanding the pain and the difficulties that others were going through. And again, you can see perspective taking is a very important ingredient of altruism. Similarly, aggression, for that matter, understanding aggression, understanding why somebody gets angry and resorts to violence, that is also very interestingly understood by this mechanism of perspective taking. Again, when I am implicating perspective taking in all of these three things, I am not saying that it is the only thing responsible, but it is a very important component of these activities. So, when people fail to take the perspective of dehumanized targets, they feel disgust, which is a very strictly negative emotion, and which is often linked to moral violations and then subsequent aggressive responses. So, basically what is happening, what might be happening is that the people in Nazi Germany who were committing these atrocities were not able to take the perspective of the suffering Jews. The people who are practicing slavery, who are employing and buying and selling these slaves and making them work like animals, were not able to, or consciously decided not to, take the perspective of these other individuals, because if they would have taken perspective, committing those atrocities would have become impossible. So, this is again something very interesting. It is a very interesting component of whether you consciously decide to put yourself in this other person's shoes. If you do not, then obviously you are pushing yourself towards the dehumanized perception of these social groups. Alright. So, this is just one aspect of dehumanized perception that I have talked about in this lecture. We will talk more about dehumanization in the lectures next week with the next class. Thank you.